Sir, your daughter's name is already on that plaque. 2019 recipient. To understand the silence that followed those words, the way my father's hand froze on the podium, the way my brother's face went slack, the way 200 people in dress whites turned to stare at a bronze plaque on the wall, you have to understand the 23 years that led to it. You have to understand that I learned early to be invisible. The Naval War College in Newport sits on Narragansett Bay like a promise carved in granite. I'd driven past it 1,000 times growing up in Portsmouth, watching the officers come and go in their crisp uniforms, never imagining I'd one day walk those halls, never imagining my father would rather I didn't. But that came later. First came the phone calls. "Libby, honey, your brother's getting promoted to commander." My mother's voice on a Tuesday in March, bright with manufactured cheer. "We're having a little celebration dinner Friday. Can you make it?" I was in my apartment in Norfolk, staring at deployment orders for the Carl Vinson. 6 months in the Pacific, leaving in 2 weeks. I hadn't told them yet. "I'll try, Mom." "You'll try," the cheer dimmed. "Your father's Navy League ceremony is the following week. That one's important. I need you there." "I know." "Do you? Because last year you missed." "I was working." "You're always working. Libby, I don't even know what you do anymore. Something with logistics?" "Logistics." That's what I'd told them 6 years ago, when I made captain and couldn't explain why a 37-year-old woman with a career they barely understood was suddenly commanding a destroyer. Easier to let them think I shuffled papers somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Navy than to explain that I'd spent 3 years in the Arabian Gulf, that my ship had intercepted weapons shipments and tracked submarines, that admirals knew my name. "Something like that," I said. "Well, try to take time off. For family, your brother made time." My brother. Lieutenant Commander Jackson Scully, golden child, Dad's clone in every way that mattered. He'd followed the path laid out for him with precision. Naval Academy, surface warfare, steady climb up the ranks. No detours, no surprises. The kind of career you could explain at dinner parties. I'd taken a different route. ROTC at URI while Dad was deployed. He'd wanted me at Annapolis like Jackson, but I'd chosen civilian college, naval training on the side. A compromise that felt like betrayal to him. Then I'd gone surface warfare anyway, proved I could do what Jackson did, and he'd never forgiven me for doing it my way. "I'll be there," I told my mother. I made it to the dinner, barely. Flew in from Norfolk Thursday night, arrived at the restaurant in Portsmouth just as they were ordering appetizers. The place was called the River House. White tablecloths, water views, the kind of establishment where naval officers brought their families to celebrate promotions and retirements. "Libby!" My mother stood, enveloped me in a hug that smelled like Chanel and concern. "You look tired?" "Long week." She always looks tired. Jackson, from his seat at the head of the table. He'd grown a beard since I'd seen him last. Naval regulations be damned. Apparently he had a staff job now where grooming standards were flexible. "How's the logistics game, sis?" "Thriving." My father nodded at me from across the table. Admiral Theodore Scully, retired. 3 stars that still carried weight 15 years after he'd left active duty. He consulted now, sat on boards, gave speeches. The Navy had been his identity for 40 years, and retirement hadn't changed that. "You're late," he said. "I'm here." Jackson's wife, Brittany, smiled at me with the kind of pity people reserve for distant relatives at funerals. "We were just talking about Jackson's new assignment. Tell her, honey." "Pentagon," Jackson said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Strategic planning. I start in August." "Congratulations." "Thanks. It's a stepping stone, you know. Dad says if I play it right, I could have my own command by 40. I was 39. I'd had my first command at 36. The dinner proceeded with the familiar rhythm of family gatherings, where everyone knows their role. Mom asked careful questions about my health, my apartment, whether I was seeing anyone. Jackson talked about the Pentagon, about the admiral who'd requested him specifically, about the house they were buying in Arlington. Dad offered strategic advice, war stories, connections Jackson should cultivate. No one asked about my work. They never did anymore. Easier to ignore the vague career than to acknowledge they didn't understand it. The Navy League ceremony next week, Dad said over dessert. I'm receiving the Distinguished Service Award. Should be quite an event. That's wonderful, I said. 200 people confirmed. The Commandant's sending a representative. Vice Admiral Boone will be there. You remember him, Jackson? From the Abraham Lincoln. Yes, sir. Good man. You should talk to him about your Pentagon assignment. He has connections at OPNAV. Will do. Dad's eyes flicked to me, then away. You'll be there, Libby? Yes. Good, it's black tie. The invitation said family would be seated at the head table. He paused. Try to look presentable. Brittany coughed into her napkin. Mom studied her wine glass. Jackson smirked. I finished my coffee and said nothing. The days before the ceremony passed in a blur of preparation I couldn't discuss. The Vinson deployment, delayed by maintenance issues in San Diego. A classified briefing about Iranian fast boats in the Strait of Hormuz. A call from the commander of Naval Surface Forces asking my opinion on a tactical scenario that would appear in next year's training exercises. At night, in my Norfolk apartment, I'd stare at my dress whites hanging in the closet. 4 rows of ribbons, gold surface warfare pin, captain's eagles on the collar. The uniform told a story my family had never bothered to read. I thought about wearing it to the ceremony, thought about the shock on their faces, the questions it would raise. Then I thought about my father's award, his moment, the attention that uniform would draw. It felt petty to overshadow him, felt small. So I packed a black dress instead. Friday afternoon, I drove to Newport. The ceremony was at the War College's Spruance Hall, a building I knew better than my family realized. I'd lectured there twice, once on maritime interdiction operations, once on leadership under pressure. But I'd never mentioned it at family dinners, never corrected them when they assumed my career was administrative drudgery. Easier to be underestimated than to fight for recognition I didn't need. I arrived early, parked in the visitor lot, and walked across the manicured grounds. Spring in Rhode Island meant daffodils and fresh-cut grass, and the smell of the bay. Officers in dress uniforms moved between buildings, some heading toward Spruance Hall, others toward Luce Library. A few nodded at me as they passed, recognition I couldn't return without revealing more than I wanted to. Inside Spruance Hall, the ceremony space was already filling. 200 chairs in neat rows, a stage with podium and Navy flags, tables along the sides displaying maritime artifacts and historical plaques. The walls were covered with photographs of past award recipients, brass nameplates beneath each one. I found my seat at the head table, next to Jackson. Mom and Dad would sit on the other side, closest to the stage. Brittany was already there, checking her makeup in a compact mirror. Nice dress, she said, looking at my simple black sheath. Very understated. Thank you. I almost wore black, but Jackson said navy blue was more appropriate for a military ceremony. You know, to show respect. I smiled and said nothing. The hall filled quickly. Officers in whites, Navy League officials in tuxedos, local dignitaries and their spouses. The energy was formal, celebratory, the kind of event where careers were advanced through carefully placed conversations and strategic handshakes. Vice Admiral Boone arrived at 6:45 p.m., a tall man with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons that told the story of 35 years at sea. He moved through the crowd like a shark through water, purposeful, aware, missing nothing. His eyes passed over me once, twice, then held. He knew. I gave him the slightest shake of my head, and he understood. Not tonight, not here. The ceremony began at 7 p.m. sharp. The Navy League president welcomed everyone, made jokes about the weather and the bar and the distinguished guests in attendance. Then he introduced the evening's honorees, 3 recipients of the Distinguished Service Award, my father among them. Dad took the stage to sustained applause. He looked good up there, comfortable in his tuxedo, the 3-star pin on his lapel catching the lights. This was his element, the formal recognition, the public acknowledgement, the proof that his decades of service mattered. His speech was everything you'd expect. Gratitude for the award, appreciation for his family's support, stories from his career that were both humble and self-aggrandizing in the way of successful military officers. The audience laughed at the right moments, nodded seriously at others. Then he got to the acknowledgments. "I couldn't have done any of this without my family's support," he said, looking down at our table. "My wife, Misty, who has been my anchor for 42 years. My son Jackson, who followed in my footsteps and made me prouder than I can say. A commander now heading to the Pentagon, the future of the Navy." Jackson sat straighter. Brittany touched his arm, beaming. Dad's eyes moved to me, stopped. I watched him calculate, search for words, try to find something to say about the daughter whose career he'd never understood and had long since stopped asking about. "And my youngest," he said finally, "Libby, who is here tonight." He gestured vaguely in my direction. The pause hung in the air like smoke. "Let's give them all a round of applause." The audience clapped politely. Jackson's smile was triumphant. Mom looked pained. I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap, face neutral. This was familiar. This was expected. This was 23 years of being the daughter who disappointed him by succeeding differently. Dad continued his speech, thanked the Navy League, made closing remarks about service and sacrifice. More applause. He stepped down from the podium, accepting handshakes and congratulations as he made his way back to our table. "That was beautiful, Ted." Mom squeezed his hand. "Well done, Dad." Jackson stood to embrace him. I opened my mouth to add my own congratulations, something appropriate, something that would end this evening with dignity intact, when a voice called out from the back of the hall. "Excuse me, Admiral Scully?" Everyone turned. A lieutenant commander I didn't recognize was standing near the far wall, next to the display of historical plaques. Young, maybe 30, clearly uncomfortable interrupting. "Sir," he said, louder now. "I apologize for the interruption, but your daughter's name is already on that plaque, 2019 recipient." The hall went silent, not the polite silence of an audience waiting for a speaker, but the shocked silence of a record scratch, of the moment before a car accident, of reality breaking. "What?" Dad's voice was sharp. The lieutenant commander pointed at the wall. "The Distinguished Service Award plaque, Captain Elizabeth Scully, 2019. 200 heads turned in unison. I heard chairs scrape, whispers start, someone gasp. On the wall, between the photographs and beneath the brass nameplates, was the plaque I'd walked past 100 times and never mentioned. The list of names glowed under the spotlights. 2017 VADM Robert Greene, 2018 Captain Michael Torres, 2019 Captain Elizabeth Scully, 2020 RADM Jennifer Walsh. My father stared at the wall, then at me. His face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, something that might have been betrayal. "Captain?" he said. Jackson stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. "That's impossible." But Vice Admiral Boone was already moving toward our table, his dress shoes clicking on the hardwood floor. He stopped beside me, and his face carried the weight of someone who'd tried to prevent exactly this moment and failed. "Admiral Scully," he said to my father, "I believe there's been some confusion about your daughter's service record." Dad couldn't finish the sentence. "Captain Elizabeth Scully," Boone's voice carried across the silent hall. "Commanding Officer, USS Winston Churchill. Previously, Commanding Officer, USS Porter. 2 deployments to 5th Fleet, 1 to 7th. Navy Cross nomination for actions off the coast of Yemen in 2018. She's one of the finest surface warfare officers of her generation." Mom's hand was over her mouth. Brittany had gone pale. Jackson was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "You commanded a destroyer?" Dad's voice was barely a whisper. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. Saw the man who'd wanted me to follow his exact path and couldn't respect any other. Saw the father who'd spent 23 years not asking questions because he was afraid of the answers. "Yes," I said. "Why didn't you?" "Tell you." I stood up slowly, smoothed my dress. "I did. 6 years ago, when I made captain. You said, 'That's nice, honey,' and asked Jackson about his new duty station." The memory landed like a physical blow. I watched him flinch. "I told you about my command," I continued, my voice steady, quiet. "You said it was good. I was keeping busy. I told you about my deployment. You asked if I was seeing anyone. I stopped telling you things because you stopped listening." "Libby," Mom started. "I'm not angry," I said, and meant it. I stopped being angry years ago. I just got tired of fighting for space in conversations that had already decided who I was. Jackson found his voice. "You let us think." "I let you think whatever you wanted to think. It was easier than correcting you every time you assumed I was filing paperwork somewhere." Vice Admiral Boone cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, Admiral Scully, your daughter is being considered for Major Command, deep selection to 07. If recommended, she'd be one of the youngest flag officers in recent history." The hall remained frozen, 200 people watching a family dissolve in real time. I could feel their eyes, their judgment, their fascination with this private catastrophe made public. My father looked at the plaque. At me, at Boone. His mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally he said, "I didn't know." "No," I agreed, "you didn't." I picked up my clutch from the table. Mom was crying now, silent tears she kept wiping away with her napkin. Jackson had collapsed back into his chair, staring at nothing. Brittany was whispering furiously to him, her face flushed. "Congratulations on your award, Dad," I said. "It's well deserved." I walked toward the exit. The crowd parted automatically, the way people do in the presence of authority they've suddenly recognized. Vice Admiral Boone fell into step beside me. "Hell of a way to come out," he murmured. "Wasn't my choice. Could have corrected that lieutenant commander. Could have, didn't." At the door, I paused and looked back one last time. My father still stood at the head table, the Distinguished Service Award in his hands, staring at the plaque on the wall that proved his daughter had earned the same recognition 4 years before him. Jackson was on his feet now, gesturing angrily at something, probably me. Mom had her arms around Dad's shoulders. Brittany was on her phone, already spreading this story through whatever social networks naval officers' wives maintained. The scene looked like a painting, family portrait and shattered assumptions. I pushed through the doors into the cool Newport evening. Behind me, I heard the ceremony resuming, the Navy League president trying to restore order, someone laughing nervously. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A text from the commander of Naval Surface Forces. "Heard there was excitement at the War College tonight. You okay?" Word traveled fast in the Navy. "Fine," I typed back. "Long overdue conversation. Your father's a good man, old school." "I know. Give him time." I drove back to Norfolk in the dark, the road ahead illuminated by headlights, the road behind disappearing into memory. At 2 a.m., somewhere on I-95 in Connecticut, my phone rang. "Mom." I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 3 a.m., again at 4 a.m. Finally, at 5 a.m., I answered. "Libby," her voice was hoarse. "We need to talk." "Okay." "Your father he's devastated. He didn't know. He truly didn't know." "I believe that. Why didn't you tell us? Really tell us? Make us listen?" I pulled into a rest stop, turned off the engine, and watched the sun start to rise over the highway. Because I got tired of proving myself in a family that had already decided I wasn't worth paying attention to, it was easier to be invisible than to constantly fight for visibility. "But you're our daughter." "I'm also a captain in the United States Navy. I've commanded warships, led sailors into harm's way, made decisions that affected national security. But at family dinners, I'm the one who does something with logistics. Do you understand how exhausting that is?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Your father wants to talk to you." "Not yet." "Libby." "Mom, I love you. I love Dad and Jackson and this family. But I need you to understand something. I didn't hide my career. I told you about it. Repeatedly. You just weren't interested in the details because they didn't fit the narrative you'd already written. That's not fair. Maybe not, but it's true." I ended the call and drove the rest of the way to Norfolk in silence. My apartment felt smaller than I remembered, filled with the accumulated debris of a life spent at sea, books on naval tactics, framed photos from deployments, the sword I'd been presented at my change of command ceremony. On my desk was a folder marked confidential, the Carl Vinson deployment brief. In 2 weeks, I'd be underway, back in my element, back where rank and capability mattered more than family expectations. The phone rang again, this time Jackson. "You made Dad look like a fool," he said without preamble. "I didn't make him do anything, he did that himself. By not knowing you'd," he stopped. "Why didn't you tell me? We're both surface warfare. We could've, I don't know, talked about it." "When?" I asked. "When you were explaining to everyone how you were following in Dad's footsteps? When you were talking about your Pentagon assignment like it was some major achievement? When was I supposed to mention that I'd already done everything you're still working toward?" The silence on the other end was answer enough. "I didn't want to compete with you, Jackson. I never did. I just wanted to do my job without having to constantly justify it to a family that had already decided it wasn't important. You let us think. I let you think what you wanted to think. That's on you." I hung up before he could respond. 3 days later, a package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a photograph, the War College plaque, my name clearly visible in brass. A handwritten note from my father. "I should have asked. I should have listened. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start." 2 weeks later, I stood on the bridge of the Carl Vinson as it left San Diego, heading toward the vast Pacific. Behind me, 200 sailors executed their duties with the precision I'd helped instill. Ahead, 6 months of operations in one of the world's most complex maritime environments. My family would call, eventually, and eventually I'd answer. We'd rebuild something from the wreckage of that ceremony in Newport. But it would be different this time, built on truth instead of assumption. On respect instead of condescension. I'd spent 23 years being invisible by choice. That chapter was closed. The sun set behind the California coast, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The carrier cut through the water at 20 knots, heading toward a horizon only I could see. "Captain?" My XO approached, holding a tablet. "The Admiral's compliments. He's requesting a video call at 1900. Tell him I'll be ready." The XO nodded and